Ladies and gentlemen, we've all met them. The ones who call only when they need something, but the ones who vanish when you're down but show up when you're useful. They don't ask how you're doing because they don't care. They ask what you can do because that's all they ever wanted. It's painful, but more than that, it's revealing. Not about them, about us. Let's talk about the subtle, corrosive attitude of people who only use others, and how to guard your soul from being just another stepping stone on someone else's self-serving path. They see relationships as transactions, not connections. There's something deeply unsettling about waking up one day and realizing that someone you trusted never truly saw you. Not your hopes, not your heart, not your humanity, only your utility. At first, it's subtle. You chalk it up to busyness or stress. You convince yourself that they do care, just in their own way. You dismiss the knots in your stomach and explain away the hollowness after every interaction. But over time, the truth becomes harder to ignore. You were never in a relationship, you were in a transaction. We live in a world that often confuses usefulness with worth. In personal and professional settings alike, people start to measure others not by who they are, but by what they can do. And so connection becomes currency. Presence is only appreciated if it comes with performance. Attention is only given when there's something to gain. That's not connection. That's conditional. That's control. The difference between a healthy relationship and an exploitative one is not always obvious at the beginning. In a healthy bond, there's reciprocity. There's a flow of trust, empathy, and shared vulnerability. We show up for each other, not because of obligation, but because of care. But when someone uses you, it's different. Their kindness is calculated. Their interest is instrumental. They don't ask how you are unless the answer affects what they need from you. I remember hearing the story of a woman named Rachel. For 3 years, she was the first to arrive and the last to leave at every corporate event. She didn't complain. She believed in the mission. She believed in her team. She believed, most of all, that her dedication would be seen and appreciated. When her father fell ill, she approached her manager, emotionally torn, asking for a few days to travel home. His response was icy. "I need you to stay focused on work right now." Not a single question about her father, not a single ounce of compassion. She was shattered, not because he said no, but because of how easily he dismissed her pain. That was the moment it clicked. She wasn't a teammate, she was a tool, and when a tool is no longer serving a function, it's set aside. This kind of behavior is more common than we'd like to admit, and is not always loud or cruel. Often it's subtle. It's the friend who only calls when they need help moving. The colleague who praises you just enough to keep you producing more. The partner who disappears until it's convenient again. These people wear masks of connection, but underneath, it's all calculus. And the real danger isn't just that they take from us, it's that we start to question our own worth. We begin to believe the lie that our value is tied to our output, that love must be earned, that loyalty must be proven. We stop asking what we need, we suppress our desires, we silence our intuition, all to keep being useful. But you were not put on this earth to be useful, you were put here to be whole. We don't need more efficiency in our relationships, we need more empathy. We need people who don't just tolerate our humanity, but celebrate it, who lean in when we're struggling, who value our presence, not just our performance. Think about your own life. Who are the people who leave you feeling seen, not spent? Who are the ones who ask how you're really doing and wait for the real answer? Those are the relationships to nurture. That's the kind of leader to follow. That's the kind of friend to become. But what do you do when you realize you're in a relationship where you're being used? First, believe your discomfort. It's there for a reason. Your body knows before your brain does. That unease, that sense of being drained, it's not a flaw in you. It's feedback, and it's pointing to a truth you may not want to admit, that not everyone who claims to care actually does. Second, reframe the narrative. Being used says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. You are not less because someone treated you like less. You are not weak because you gave generously. If anything, your capacity for care is a sign of strength. But strength also means drawing boundaries, saying no, walking away. And finally, rebuild your circle with intention. Find the ones who don't just value what you do, but who you are. The ones who show up without being asked, who give without keeping score, who are there when there's nothing to gain. Because here's the truth, relationships are meant to be rooted in connection, not convenience. We're wired for belonging, not bartering. And when we allow ourselves to be fully human, to give and receive with open hearts, we step into a life that's not just productive, but purposeful. So let go of the belief that being used is the price of being loved. Let go of the fear that if you stop performing, you'll stop mattering. The right people won't just want you at your best, they'll stand by you at your worst. And that kind of love, that kind of connection, it's not a transaction. That's transformation. We all crave connection, not just company, not just contact, but real meaningful connection. The kind that feels safe, the kind where you can breathe a little easier because you know you're not performing, you're not being measured, you're just being. But there's a painful truth we all run into at some point. Not every person who walks beside us is there for us. Some are only there for what we can give. And when the giving stops, so do they. You can test it, not with anger, not with drama, but with quiet truth. Say no. Just once. Set a boundary. Not a wall, just a gentle line that says, this is what I can give, and this is what I can't. You'll notice it then. A shift. Their voice changes. The warmth thins, the replies get shorter, the calls fade, the invitations dry up like a well in the sun. You don't even need to argue, you just have to stop feeding the dynamic, and when you do, they disappear. Because for some people, the only reason they were ever around was the benefit. Your kindness was a transaction. Your generosity was an open tap. Your time was their resource. And when that changes, when you are no longer useful, the unspoken contract is broken. They never signed up for you. They signed up for what you could do. And that's why it hurts. Not because you lost someone real, but because you thought you had something real. There's a difference between people who love you and people who love what you do for them. It can look the same, it can sound the same, it can feel the same for a while, but the moment you shift the terms, the truth emerges. You become a stranger to those who claimed closeness, invisible to those who once called you essential. And in that vanishing act, a mirror is held up, not to them, but to you. You see, it's not just about how people treat you, it's about what you believe you deserve. Many of us have been conditioned to be givers, helpers, fixers, to pour ourselves out like a cup that never runs dry. We mistake usefulness for worth. If I can help them, they'll stay. If I say yes enough, they'll love me. If I stretch myself thin, they'll notice. But they don't. Because the people who only stay when you give are not paying attention to you. They're looking at the benefit. I once spoke to a man who built his life around being needed. He said he had a network of admirers, friends, allies. He was always the one people called when they needed a job, a connection, an introduction. He loved it. At first, it made him feel important, valuable, until the day he needed help. He lost his job and picked up the phone. No one answered. A few replied with polite regret, but most silence. He said, I realized I didn't have a network. I had a Rolodex of users, and I was one of them too. I was using them to feel important, and they were using me for what I could provide. That's the hardest part to admit, not just that others used us, but that we tolerated it, maybe even enabled it because we thought it was love or loyalty or connection. But what it really was conditional presence. I'll stay as long as you keep delivering. That's not friendship. That's not care. That's a business agreement with your soul on the line. And it's easy to get cynical, to close up, to stop trusting, to say no one is real, or I won't let anyone in again. But that's not the answer either. The answer is discernment. It's not about building walls. It's about building doors that lock and unlock with wisdom. It's about testing the foundation before you build a house on it. Because the people who are real, they don't leave when you say no. They lean in. They ask if you're okay. They don't punch your boundaries. They honor them. They see your worth, even when you're not producing something for them. Real relationships can survive silence. They can survive distance. They can survive seasons where you have nothing to offer but your truth. In fact, those seasons reveal who belongs and who was just visiting. So let's redefine what connection means. Let's stop asking, who can I impress? And start asking, who can I trust with my silence? Because the ones who truly love you won't vanish when you're quiet. they'll pull up a chair and wait with you. The ones who care won't resent your boundaries, they'll respect them. And the ones who are worthy of your energy, you won't have to earn their presence. It will be freely given, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. We need to stop equating usefulness with worth. You are not a resource. You are not a vending machine. You are not a means to someone else's end. You are a human being with needs, limits, and value beyond what you produce. And the more we honor that in ourselves, the more we'll attract people who honor it too. Because in the end, truth is what sustains relationships. Not charm, not performance, not people-pleasing. Truth. The raw, honest, sometimes messy kind. And when you build something on truth, it lasts. When you build something on performance, it crumbles the moment you get tired. So be brave enough to say no, brave enough to step back, brave enough to observe what happens when you stop feeding someone's expectations. Because what you'll see clearly, painfully, beautifully is who is real. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. And that clarity, that is the beginning of freedom. Not the freedom to be alone, but the freedom to choose connection that's rooted in truth. The kind that stays, the kind that sees, the kind that doesn't disappear when you're no longer useful. Because to them, you were never just useful. You were always simply you. And that was always enough. We all have needs, not because we're weak, but because we're human. And in healthy relationships, whether they're romantic, familial, or professional, those needs aren't a burden, they're a bridge. They connect us. They allow us to say, I trust you enough to let you see me not at my strongest, but at my most vulnerable. The problem isn't that we have needs. The problem begins when someone takes our needs and uses them against us. Think about the moments when you've said, I'm tired, not because you're lazy, but because you've given everything you have, emotionally, mentally, physically. And instead of being met with compassion, you're hit with, you're selfish. Selfish for needing rest, for honoring your limits. That's not concern, that's control. That's someone taking your humanity and redefining it as weakness so they can continue to extract from you. Or the times you've said, I'm hurting. You weren't looking for pity. You weren't even looking for solutions, just acknowledgement, just someone to say, I see you, I hear you, but instead you're called dramatic, overreacting, sensitive. Suddenly your pain isn't real, it's performative. And in that one moment, what could have been a moment of deepened trust becomes a transaction. You're expected to prove your pain is valid before it's treated with care. And then there's when you say, I'm not available right now. You need space, you need time, but instead of understanding, you're told you're disloyal. Disloyalty implies betrayal. So now your act of self-preservation is spun into a narrative of abandonment. You're the villain for drawing a line, the bad guy for saying not now. But the truth is, boundaries are not betrayals. They are necessities. What's really happening in all these interactions is subtle, it's psychological, but it's powerful. Guilt becomes the glue that keeps you stuck, because if you feel bad enough, you'll keep bending. If they can convince you that your needs are wrong, they can keep taking without ever giving. And this is the pattern. Over and over again, you give, they take. You cry, they scoff. You pause, they push. In healthy dynamics, needs are met with honor, not obligation, not resentment, not manipulation. People who love you won't make you feel ashamed for being human. They won't weaponize your honesty. They won't make your emotions feel like a debt you now owe them. Because real connection isn't about what you can offer when you're at 100%. It's about who sticks around when you're at 10%. And real care sounds like, I get it. Take your time. How can I help? But guilt in toxic relationships is an anchor. It weighs you down just enough that you stop moving forward. It clouds your clarity. It makes you second guess yourself. It whispers maybe they're right, and you start adjusting your behavior not to heal the relationship, but to avoid more guilt. You silence your pain, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you're tired of defending why it does. This is how people lose themselves. Not in one big moment, but in 1,000 little ones. The day you stop saying no. The night you cried quietly so no one would accuse you of seeking attention. The moment you picked up the phone, even though you needed sleep just to prove you were still loyal. These aren't isolated events. They are symptoms of a deeper truth. Someone has trained you to feel guilty for being human. And yet, here's what we often forget. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to prove your pain is real. You don't need to explain why you need rest, time, care, or space. Your needs are not negotiable. They are foundational. You're not a machine. You're not a resource to be consumed. You're a human being. And anyone who treats your needs as obstacles is not interested in a relationship. They're interested in a transaction. When someone manipulates you through guilt, what they're really saying is, your worth is tied to what you can give me. And if you stop giving, you stop mattering. That's not love, that's conditional tolerance. That's using someone not caring for them. Real love listens. Real care pauses. Real connection checks in instead of checking out. It doesn't rush to judgment. It doesn't make you feel like your needs are a burden. It reminds you that you're allowed to be human, to feel, to break, to rest, to say no. So here's the challenge. Pay attention to how people respond when you say, I need. Do they lean in or do they pull away? Do they shame you or support you? Because how someone handles your needs will tell you everything about what they truly value, your well-being or your usefulness. And more importantly, how do you respond to your own needs? Do you give yourself permission to rest, to cry, to say, I can't right now? Or have you absorbed the belief that doing so is wrong? If you've been taught to feel guilty for having needs, it's time to unlearn that. Because your needs are not too much, your voice is not too loud, your boundaries are not too rigid. They are the evidence that you value yourself, that you're not here just to survive, you're here to live fully, authentically, freely. You're not difficult, you're not dramatic, you're not disloyal, you're human. And anyone who treats your humanity like it's a flaw is not someone who deserves front row access to your life. You don't have to shrink to fit someone's comfort zone. You don't have to bleed to prove your love. You don't have to carry guilt for simply existing as a person with needs. Because the people who really care, they won't punish you for being human. They'll thank you for trusting them with your truth. We all long to be seen, not just for what we offer, but for who we are. We crave that feeling of being appreciated, not only for our actions, but for our essence. There's a distinct difference between someone who values you and someone who uses you. One sees you as a whole person, flaws, dreams, and all. The other sees you as a tool, a means to an end, a stepping stone on their path. It often starts subtly. At first, it feels like encouragement. You do something helpful and they light up. You sacrifice your time and they shower you with praise. You solve a crisis for them and they call you a hero. But slowly, the pattern begins to form. The praise is conditional. The warmth only comes when you are producing something for them. Your worth in their eyes is directly tied to your utility. But what happens when you stop producing? What happens when you pause to rest? When you pursue your own dreams? When you choose growth, even if it doesn't revolve around their needs? That's when the silence grows deafening. The same people who used to sing your praises suddenly go quiet. The energy shifts. They become distant, maybe even resentful. You start to notice that they were never cheering for you. They were cheering for what you did for them. It wasn't your success that moved them. It was how your success made their lives easier. The moment your evolution threatens their comfort, the applause dies out. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because if we're not aware, we begin to internalize this pattern. We start shrinking ourselves so we can keep their approval. We dim our light so we don't outshine them. We ignore our needs so we can stay useful. And over time, we lose ourselves. That's why so many people stay small, not because they lack the ambition or the talent, but because the people around them respond to their growth with coldness, not celebration. Somewhere along the line, we were taught that love is earned through performance, that approval is tied to productivity. We were never taught that we are worthy simply because we exist. So when we begin to outgrow the version of ourselves that once made others comfortable, we feel guilty, we pull back, we second guess our progress. We wonder, is it selfish to want more? Is it wrong to choose myself? No, it's not wrong, it's brave. Because the truth is, anyone who genuinely loves you will never ask you to stay small. Real connection doesn't come with strings attached. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't celebrate you less when you rise, it celebrates you more. When you start healing, growing, changing, real connection expands with you. It adjusts, it cheers, it roots for your freedom, not your servitude. Think about the people in your life who have clapped for you even when your success had nothing to do with them. The ones who were proud of you when you got that new job, even if it meant you had less time for them. The ones who celebrated your healing journey, even if it meant you began to outgrow unhealthy dynamics. The ones who smiled at your independence rather than being threatened by it. That's real love. That's real friendship. That's real leadership. On the other hand, those who disappear when you no longer serve their needs weren't your people. They were your consumers. And once they've taken what they want, they move on. This truth hurts. It hurts because many of us have spent years pouring into people who only wanted us as long as we stayed in a role that served them. We've bent ourselves backward for people who never once bent forward to meet us. We've confused being needed with being loved, but they are not the same. Being needed can feel powerful. It gives us a sense of purpose. But if that need is only ever one-sided, it becomes a trap. It becomes a life of performance, where your value is measured in output. Where the moment you have a boundary, a need, a dream of your own, the whole relationship collapses. So what do? We start by telling ourselves a different story. One where we are not just helpers or fixers or givers. One where we are also allowed to receive, allowed to rest, allowed to grow. We start believing that we don't need to earn love through sacrifice. That our dreams are not selfish. That our expansion is not betrayal. And then we look around, we take stock of who is still clapping when the lights aren't on us. We pay attention to who shows up when we're not performing. We notice who says, "I'm proud of you," when we're chasing something they don't directly benefit from. That's the metric. That's how you know. Because in the end, it's not about the loudest cheers. It's about the most consistent ones. It's not about being praised for what you do. It's about being loved for who you are. So if you've been shrinking to stay loved, let this be the moment you stop. If you've been staying small to stay safe, let this be your wake-up call. You were not born to be a tool in someone else's toolbox. You were born to be a whole, complex, evolving human being, one who's allowed to grow without guilt, one who deserves to be celebrated, not just for your usefulness, but for your presence. And those who cannot love you in your fullness, let them go. Because someone else is waiting to meet the real you, the whole you, the you who rises, not to please, but to live. Some people only change when they're forced to, not by love, not by kindness, not by second chances, but by the sharp sting of consequence. And that's a hard thing to accept, especially when you're the one who gave everything, time, energy, empathy, believing that your consistency, your loyalty, your love could inspire transformation. You saw the best in them and held on to the hope that one day they would see it too. But that day never came, did it? Not while they still had access to you. They stayed the same while you bent, broke, healed, and bent again. You gave them room to grow, but they never moved. And the truth is, they didn't need to. Because you made it easy not to. You were there, on call, on demand, emotionally available, spiritually stretched, always giving, and they were always taking. Not because they couldn't give, but because they didn't have to. People ask, can someone like that ever change? And the answer is complicated. Yes, they can, but rarely. And usually not while you're still there absorbing the cost of their comfort. Growth is uncomfortable, it's disruptive. And some people don't pursue change unless staying the same finally hurts more than the pain of evolving. In other words, unless they lose access to you. It's only when the door closes, when you stop explaining, stop reaching, stop justifying your worth, that they notice what they had. It's only when your silence replaces your support that they feel the void your presence once filled. Sometimes it takes your absence for someone to realize your presence was a gift. But here's the catch. That realization often comes too late, not just for them, but for you. Because by the time they wake up to what they've lost, you've already grown past needing their validation. And that is the point. It's not your job to fix someone who refuses to see their own brokenness. You are not a therapist for someone who weaponizes their wounds. You are not the punishment for their past. And you are not the reward for their inconsistency. You are not a ladder for someone else's climb. You are a human being with feelings, with dignity, with dreams that stretch beyond being someone's emotional safety net. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to say, I deserve more than this. You don't have to shrink just to fit inside someone else's limited view of you. And you don't have to keep proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it. It's not your failure if someone else didn't change, it's your clarity. The moment you realize that no matter how much love you give, it cannot make someone become who they refuse to be, is the moment you start honoring your own soul. Because staying in a cycle of hope and disappointment is not loyalty, it's self-neglect dressed up in devotion. The people who see you clearly, who love you honestly, don't wait until you walk away to appreciate you. They don't need your absence to recognize your presence. They value you now as you are, not for what you do, but for who you are. They make space for your feelings. They listen without defensiveness. They show up not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard. That's the kind of connection you deserve. When you finally step back from someone who used your goodness as a convenience, you will feel the ache of absence, but you'll also feel something else: relief, peace, the quiet whisper of self-respect returning to your spirit. It doesn't mean you didn't love them. It means you finally chose to love yourself more. And that love isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It shows up in the quiet boundaries you set, in the moments you say no without guilt, in the mornings you wake up without anxiety, because you're no longer emotionally hostage to someone else's chaos. That is healing. That is strength. That is what reclaiming your worth looks like. Some people will tell you that you're being cold, distant, unkind. But boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. They say, this is where I end and you begin. They draw a line not to punish, but to protect, to preserve the parts of you that were slowly being eroded by someone who didn't know how to care for what you offered freely. This is not about bitterness, it's about freedom. It's about waking up to the fact that being needed is not the same as being valued, that being tolerated is not the same as being loved, that being useful is not the same as being cherished. And when you make that shift, when you move from performing for approval to standing in your truth, everything changes. You start attracting different people, you start speaking different words, you start breathing again, because you're no longer fighting to earn what should have been given without condition. So if you've ever felt discarded when your usefulness ran out, if you've ever watched someone's tone change the moment you stop giving, if you've ever realized too late that they never